Do you remember what it was like? Before you heard that compliment that wasn't about your looks, before any outside words, there was a fatigue inside, a silent exhaustion, muffled, disguised as strength, as independence, as everything's fine. But it wasn't, because deep down you knew. You knew you were shrinking, to not seem too much, to not be difficult, to make sure he stayed. Did you realize that? Or better yet, did you already suspect? It was that uneasy feeling that came up when you found yourself apologizing for existing too much, when you accepted breadcrumbs and still said thank you, when you looked in the mirror and felt a distance between who you saw and who you really were. It wasn't about beauty, nor about love. It was about absence, yours. And no one told you that disappearing a little every day is a cruel way to kill yourself without dying. But then, one day, something small happened. Maybe it was when you woke up, or when you looked in the mirror, or in the silence after a fight you decided not to engage in anymore. You breathed deeply, as if something had changed, and it did. But you still didn't know. You were just quieter, more aware, more sensitive to what hurt you and what no longer made sense. That's when you started to distance yourself without shouting, to lose interest in discussing things you used to beg to keep, to stop accepting invitations that made you sick inside. And he noticed, not with words, but in his restless gaze, in his attempt to pull you back into a familiar pain, in the shock of seeing you lighter. Without him, you had already changed. Even without announcing it, even without posting a caption, even without telling anyone. And that's where the true turning point lies. The quiet realization that something in you no longer submits, no longer gives in, no longer needs to prove that you deserve love. Because you finally realized that love is not what diminishes, it's what expands. That respect is not begged for, it is sustained. And that true presence will never ask for its own absence. Perhaps it was in that moment that your friends noticed. It wasn't just the way you walked, nor the more radiant skin, or the tone of your voice. It was the frequency, the different vibration of someone no longer seeking to be chosen, but to be whole, the energy of someone who no longer needs permission to exist with intensity. Have you ever felt that? That moment when you walk into a place and for some reason, all eyes turn toward you. And it's not because you look more beautiful, it's because you are more yourself. It's when the soul resumes occupying the body and the light begins to shine through the eyes, not because of someone, but despite someone. And the strongest part, you weren't seeking revenge. You weren't trying to get back. It wasn't about pride. It was simply peace. A kind of peace that frightens those who only knew how to love you in your absence of self. A kind of silence that disturbs those who became accustomed to you crying out for attention. A kind of presence that shows just how long you had been absent from yourself. It was in this state that they said, "Would you've changed?" And it was a compliment, but it was also a reflection. They saw you before you could fully see yourself. Maybe you even smiled a little, unsure of what was happening. Maybe you said, "Oh, really?" like someone who still doubts their own light. But inside, something resonated. Because yes, you were different. Not because you changed your clothes, but because you lifted a weight that wasn't yours. And this is just the beginning. What comes next is when you start to remember what you used to enjoy, listening to songs that once hurt and now heal, claiming your own Sundays, responding only to what deserves your energy, going out alone, and coming back better than you were. It's when you no longer need to block anyone, because there's no longer space for that frequency within you. And suddenly what once held you back no longer touches you, because it's not about them, it's about what you realized. And realizing is what saved you. If this has happened to you, comment, "I needed to hear this." Or just take a deep breath and let this truth settle in, because the most beautiful things are still on their way. And when they arrive, you will understand why everything had to be exactly this way. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but you felt it. In the moment when someone asked for something that before you would have said yes without thinking, and you breathed, you thought, and you said no. That was the moment. A tiny point, but it shook the structure that you had sustained for so long. The one of being good, the one of being understanding, the one of being the one who endures. Do you realize? That moment wasn't just a response. It was a milestone, an invisible line between the woman who accepted everything out of fear of losing and the woman who now prefers to lose the other but not lose herself, and that is frightening. It frightens those who were used to your obedient silence. It frightens those who thought you were just that. It even frightens you, because choosing yourself is confusing at first. There's guilt, there's fear, there's loneliness. You start to see that many of your connections were not love. They were attachment. They were emotional dependencies, conditional exchanges, complicities built on your pain. When you heal, the other person has to relearn how to read you. And not everyone wants to, not everyone can, because it's much more comfortable to keep you in the place of someone who always said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't, even when it hurt, even when you betrayed yourself, but not anymore. Now you have chosen yourself, even while trembling, even alone, even without knowing exactly where this would lead you. You chose not to go back, not to yield, not to self-sabotage, and everything began to change. What used to be routine became discomfort. What used to be normal became unbearable. What was once for the other became for me, and then the tests came. Those messages that come just to see if you're still in the same place. That disguised compliment trying to pull you back into neediness. That tempting proposal that deep down just wants to test if you still know what you deserve. Do you notice? It's as if the universe is saying, "Are you sure you've really changed? Or was it just on a whim? Are you really going to choose yourself, or will you go back to the same old cycle?" And in that moment, your soul stands up, alone but standing. And that's where the true rebirth begins. It's not when you find another love, nor when you bounce back, nor when everyone applauds your strength. It's when you learn to stay with yourself, in pain, in silence, in doubt, to stay with yourself when no one else understands. When they say you've changed too much, that you're cold, rigid, inflexible, they don't know. They don't know how many times you've erased yourself out of fear of seeming tough, how many times you've been sweet on the outside and shattered on the inside. They have no idea what it costs to be reborn without applause, what it costs to look back and realize that many of the loves you've experienced were in fact prisons adorned with flowers. But not now. Now you have realized, and you understood that living in the shadows isn't love. It's self-abandonment. You realized that giving in is always a way of begging for permanence, and you don't need that anymore, because now you are whole. And in this wholeness, something starts to rearrange. You begin to speak less and feel more, listen more, observe others' silences, and your own too. You begin to choose where you want to be, and with whom, not because you're better, but because you are more clear-headed. Your perception becomes sharp. You see subtle manipulations, notice emotional games, realize when you're being pushed into the role of savior, of the nice one, of always being available, and you don't accept it anymore. Not out of pride, but out of truth. And the most beautiful part? You start to laugh again, but with lightness, with presence, with the feeling that you're coming back to yourself and are not running away from you. Your posture changes. Your body feels more grounded. Your eyes sparkle in a way that no one can explain, and yet everyone feels. That's why they said, "You seem different." And it was a compliment. It was a calling. It was a recognition. Because when a woman returns to herself, the world around her needs to recalibrate. It needs to learn how to treat her differently. And not everyone will know how. Many will distance themselves, they will complain, they will accuse you of being difficult. But it's not you who has become difficult. It's the others who never knew how to deal with a whole woman. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling of finally being in the right place, within yourself, but not knowing where it will lead? That's how it is in the beginning. But that's where the beauty lies, because those who find you now find you with authenticity, and those who can't only confirm what you already knew. You never needed to diminish yourself to be loved. You just needed to recognize yourself again. If you're in this moment, drop a heart, or share this with someone who is also rediscovering themselves, because the pain of leaving an old version behind is significant, but the joy of not going back to it is even greater. You weren't looking for this. You didn't want to be an example, not a leader, not a reference for anyone. You just wanted peace. You just wanted the pain to stop feeling wrong all the time, to stop getting lost every time you tried to fit in. But something happens when you stop running away. You come back, and when you return, you come back whole. You come back with presence, with a silence that speaks, with a gaze that doesn't need to explain anything but says it all. You come back with a firmness that isn't arrogance, it's self-love. You come back with a calmness that isn't weakness, it's emotional maturity. And the most beautiful part? You don't come back to be loved. You come back because you love yourself. And those who find you now find another woman, a woman who won't sell herself for crumbs, who won't respond to any hi long time no see, who won't fade away just to keep someone by her side. Do you realize? Now you can clearly see who reaches out from longing and who seeks you for their ego, who praises you out of admiration and who just wants to see if they still have control. And you smile, a light smile, of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. And that's where everything changes, because you became a reference, even without wanting to, even without searching for it. The same friends who used to ask, "Are you okay?" now ask, "How did you do it?" The same people who said, "You've changed so much," now confess, "I wish I had that strength." And you who once felt lost are now a map for those still in chaos. Not because you have all the answers, but because you had the courage to ask the right questions and to stop sabotaging yourself. Do you realize this? You've become a mirror that doesn't judge but reveals, a mirror that doesn't force anyone to change but inspires. And that's why that compliment felt different. When they said you seem different, it wasn't about appearance, it was about the soul. They saw what you were just beginning to notice, that the woman who dragged herself through life, who begged for love, who needed to be saved, no longer exists. She healed, embraced herself, became enough. And what was born in her place is much greater. Its presence, its truth, its direction. And do you know the deepest part of all this? You become exactly what you needed when you were at rock bottom. You turn into the woman who would have saved you back then, the woman who would have embraced you when no one understood your pain, the woman who would have reminded you, you don't have to dim your light to be loved. Now other women look at you and see themselves. They get inspired. They ask, "How did she do that?" And you don't respond with formulas. You don't give recipes. You just exist, whole, perceptive. And that is enough. Because what the world needs isn't more advice, it's more genuine presence. Women who inhabit their own bodies, voices that don't shout but are heard, stances that don't impose but are non-negotiable, perceptions that touch without needing explanation. And you've become that, unintentionally, but with soul. Now you walk around with ease. You know what you carry, you know what you will no longer accept, know the value of your energy. And above all, know what you will never allow again. You realize the worth of your absence, and you understood that your silence is also an answer. Your distance is a form of self-care. Your no is also love for yourself. And those who know you today might not know everything you have been through, but they feel it. They feel there's a story. There are scars. There are roots. You are no longer the woman who needs to be understood all the time. You are the woman who understands herself. And because of that, you live. Have you ever felt this way? As if you finally returned home, within yourself. If so, tell me in the comments, when did you realize you had changed? Or comment, "I also came back whole, Lars," if this resonates with you. Because now no one can erase you anymore. And the most beautiful part is that this version of you is just getting started. She will love again. She will experience new things, but never in the same way again, because now you know, love is not a place to hide, it's a place where you can exist fully. You've returned, and no one else needs to confirm that for you. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a compliment, it wasn't an external achievement. It was that morning when you got out of bed, and for the first time in a long time, felt no shame in being who you are. It was when you realized you didn't need to be more beautiful, sweeter, more understanding, to deserve to stay. Because those who demand that you shrink to remain do not love you, they condition you. And you are tired of that, tired of molding yourself, tired of putting yourself last, tired of having to justify your pain with calm phrases to not seem too intense. That's when everything turned around, when you no longer responded, when you stopped explaining your absence, when you chose to be alone but whole. And healing came, not with a celebration, not with an audience. It came in the silence, in looking in the mirror, in the peace of no longer needing to pretend anything to be accepted. And then they said, "You're different." But this time you knew. I knew it was true. I knew it had broken inside and come back bigger. And the most beautiful part, you didn't come back for revenge. You came back to live. And anyone who doesn't know how to love you like this will simply lose you. Not out of arrogance, but by consequence. Because now you are too present to fit into absences. You are too bright to accept darkness out of affection. You are you, no adjustments, no permission, no fear. And if this has happened to you, comment, "I came back whole too." Or share this with someone who needs to remember, sometimes to find oneself, you first need to completely lose yourself. This conversation doesn't end here. I'll see you in the next video.